Alternate 1950s America, a young woman mathematician fights for the inclusion of women in the burgeoning Astronaut program as the world reels from the impact of a meteorite strike in the calculating stars. That's the book I'm reviewing on this episode of SFF180. Hello everyone, Thomas here, your host as always. Thank you so much for joining me. The history of American spaceflight is not only an exciting record of courage, discovery, and scientific triumph, it's a great deal deeper and more diverse than many people have been taught. Women were involved with the program from the very beginning, most notably as computers, math prodigies working insanely difficult calculations by hand to get launches running smoothly and going exactly where they needed to go. And yes, women trained as astronauts. Once the Soviets got Sputnik beeping its way into orbit, the space race was on. Any space geek, or at least anyone who's seen the movie The Right Stuff, should be able to rattle off the names of at least a few of the original Mercury 7 astronauts, men like Alan Shepard, Gus Grissom, Wally Schirra, and John Glenn. Fewer people know about the Mercury 13, a group of women who underwent privately funded physiological astronaut training at the same time as the 7. There was a school of thought that women might make good astronauts because they are smaller and lighter than men, which is definitely a non-trivial factor when you're trying to get a rocket into the sky with optimal efficiency. They were known as the first lady astronaut trainees, and all of them were experienced pilots, with the most well-known of the group, Jerry Cobb, having logged over 7,000 flight hours and set 3 world aviation records. The data showed that the women did as well as, and in most cases even better, than the male trainees at the battery of stress tests they had to endure. But in the end, NASA just wasn't interested in putting women into space, and they implemented an entirely random qualification that astronaut candidates had to have jet fighter experience, which naturally none of the women had. It would not be until 1983 that Sally Ride would become America's first female astronaut, while of course the Russians, always happy, then as now, to embarrass America whenever possible, had put Valentina Tereshkova in orbit by 1963. All this provides a rich historical canvas onto which Mary Robinette Kowal has rendered perhaps her finest novel to date. The Calculating Stars is the first in an alt history duology that serves as a prequel to Kowal's Hugo-winning novelette, The Lady Astronaut of Mars, which introduces us to astronaut Elma York and her rocket scientist husband Nathaniel on Mars in their senior years. The novel takes us back to an alternate 1950s and the catastrophic meteorite strike on Earth that led to an accelerated space program. Elma and Nathaniel are vacationing in the Poconos during that fateful March day of 1952. The meteorite hits just off the eastern seaboard, obliterating DC completely and triggering rampant destruction and tsunamis not just all up and down the coast, but globally. Surviving by sheer good fortune, Elma and Nathaniel eventually make their way to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, where they find that the highest-ranking official in the line of presidential succession to survive was the Secretary of Agriculture. It quickly becomes clear that the greenhouse effect from the meteorite strike will get so severe that it will render the planet uninhabitable within decades. The only solution for survival is to colonize space. The story then details, through Elma's perspective, the development of a space program. The book is a bit on the long side, but unfailingly readable as Kowal covers a broad swathe of both hard science, technical, as well as emotional and sociological terrain. As Elma, whose skill at doing math in her head is practically superhuman, battles crippling anxiety attacks as she finds herself an unintentional celebrity due to her guest appearances on a children's TV show, the narrative also works in such issues as climate change, grief and survivor's guilt, institutional racism and misogyny, mental health, and the bonds of family. None of it ever feels preachy, though it's easy to get frustrated at Elma's stubborn resistance to getting on meds. As a couple, Elma and Nathaniel are just about perfect. They never seem to get tired of rocket launch metaphors for sex. Or sex. But it must be said that Kowal's handling of Elma as a character is simply masterclass work. She's smart in ways that the women who worked as computers back then actually were smart, but she's broken in some very real ways as well. And some of the better passages detail her growing awareness of her own blind spots, particularly in regards to the realities of race at the time. She and Nathaniel are Jewish, with the history of bigotry that entails, but her own ignorance of the African-American experience is brought home to Elma with shocking clarity, as she pushes for the inclusion of women in the astronaut program. As in the novel, it really did happen that a fully qualified black woman pilot was made to withdraw her application. I have always felt that the best works of science fiction are those that portray a pioneering spirit. So many tropes are taken for granted in SF that it's exhilarating to find a story that shows humanity on the threshold of historical turning points, breaking barriers, taking that bold and dangerous but thrilling step into uncharted territory for the very first time. In every way, The Calculating Stars is the very best kind of science fiction. It's not only a gripping alternate history of the dawn of spaceflight, it's also about other barriers being broken, about women and people of color claiming their place in humanity's voyage of discovery, stepping into uncharted territory that had been previously denied to them. Because, despite the way some people love to embrace divisive and hateful ideologies, the simple truth remains: we won't survive unless we're willing to do it together. And there you have it. That's all I've got for this episode of SFF180. Remember, the most important thing, these are reviews. You will not always agree with me, but if you enjoyed watching, please hit that like button, share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends, and above all, please sub. If you have not done so, that's how the channel grows. Also, there is a Netflix documentary on the Mercury 13 that you can watch right now. It only came out last year, so it's worth a look. Go check that out if you want to learn more about this history. Anyway, you can also support the channel at my TeePublic store and at my Patreon, where recruits into Wink's Army get little perks like getting to see some of these videos a little early. I want to thank all of those people for their wonderful additional support. It is very much appreciated. I want to thank you guys for being the best viewers in all of BookTube. And until I see all of you next time, happy reading.